Hey, Scott, it's Friday. It's time for another transformation conversation. We're up to episode 2, which is called APIs. They are not Lego blocks. What digital transformation has done for us has brought us into a world where, cloud and APIs are probably the most used terms in the business right now. We'd like to think they're the solution to a lot of integration issues. But I thought it would be appropriate for us to talk about the many dimensions of API enablement and what they really mean. So again, they're not Lego blocks. It's not just plug it in and it goes. So, they do simplify application integration. There's no question there. But in that they are not plug and play components, what's really the process of integrating an API and what should be considered in going through that process?
Wow, that's a great question, Joe. It's a very detailed answer, but I'll summarize. But keep in mind, really just going to touch the surface here. So APIs themselves are typically manufactured with an emphasis on idempotence and safety. So that is to say that, an API call is a very, it's a unit of functionality and it's typically intended to be a part of a larger component. You can think about a component as a recipe or collection of API calls, or if you bundle that together, you get a group of recipes, you got an application and so on. Now I'm generalizing here, but, of course, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there is an orchestration and sequence required when doing more than just a simple basic unit of work. So the more simple the work and, consider the handling of exceptions if that work can't successfully be completed, the easier the integration. So analyzing the APIs and recipes therein and aligning that to the overall goals of the integration is first and foremost. Then understanding and analyzing the exceptional conditions that will need to be handled, that's really going to start to frame the picture of how things are going to operate. So establishing the operating model, change management, throughout and throughput design and transactional boundaries, all of those things need to be considered. So APIs, they give us a means for a common method of integration, and that's a great thing. But there are no silver bullets, and I've seen a lot of folks get burned thinking that they are. You're still working with a computer system, and you still need tests, you need test data, and you have to have a domain understanding of the business model.
All good points. And isn't there a shift going on in the technology leveraged in the API world from, I believe it's SOAP to RESTful APIs?
Yes. So SOAP is I'm going to throw my opinions in here. SOAP being a bloated method of moving information back and forth in messaging, where REST lends itself to cleaner interface and APIs, and it's also more concise. But yes, REST is the standard, although you have a lot of legacy applications still doing batch. So, you can't completely say SOAP is just gone. There are a lot of, healthy SOAP interfaces that are still in production today. So, Joe, if I may, I'd like to get your perspective, some additional considerations on the business side.
Well, I'm glad you asked because, in fact, I think a lot of folks think it's purely a technical thing, and there are business considerations. I sourced this from techtarget.com, but I thought they pointed out 4 areas that were really worthwhile. One is API security, right? And I think when you talk about the operating model, it's also how are we communicating? And then what is the security? Because, even though it may be cloud or maybe not cloud, there's still going to be a security layer there. So not everyone can send and receive data there, correct? There's API governance, which is, are we creating a consistent experience for the end users, including, how do you find an API? How do you deploy an API and so on? There's API analytics. Do you want to track exactly what traffic is going through that? Do you want metrics? Do you have real-time monitoring and diagnostics? And it allows, the developers and the support folks to understand how the APIs are being used, as well as, what kind of performance are those APIs providing. And then finally, API management, which is really more, if you're looking to monetize, the monetization of the APIs. So if that's something if a bank is putting that out there for their customers and they plan to charge for it, how are you going to track that? How are you going to monitor that? And how are you going to monetize all of that? So I think those are really more business side considerations in looking at APIs. And I guess to that point, I want to go back to the technology side of it, because don't you first have to determine if it's your API you're using versus a third-party API? Sort of who's talking to who and how? Isn't that something you need to know going in?
Typically, yes, and that's where we get into third-party APIs versus internal APIs, right? And so I think first defining that difference. Internal APIs are, these are developed with a mindset of reusability. So that is to say, I'm going to develop some backend components, and you can reuse these components, and you put an API in front of them so that you can be faster in your development, and there are less errors because you're reusing components as you go through your application modules. And it speeds up the development cycle. Third-party APIs, those are really developed with the intent of, as you were saying before, I want to publish these things for outside partners and for world consumption, so to speak. And we want to make available to the public a feature of our system because we're really aiming for mass adoption. So in between the two, on the technology side, the real difference in implementation is going to be the design and the support models. So, packaging the third-party API, so to speak, and this is on both sides. If you want to present that third-party API out there, that public API, you're typically talking about more coarse-grained functionality. And, care needs to be taken to keep things as straightforward as possible because you want people to easily be able to use your APIs. You also have to really consider the deprecation models, change management, and scaling factors because it's out there. And if you make a breaking change, that's just no bueno, right? Now, you can't ignore these things for internal APIs either, but your scope is typically more narrow in that you have a more defined audience and more control over who is using what. So even though you may be exposing some of those internal APIs to a third party, it's a limited set of third parties and typically a tighter integration.
That's great. I mean, that's very insightful. And again, I know we're really probably just scratching the surface. We can go much, much deeper. But I think to close our conversation here, what do you think is the most frequent misunderstanding about APIs?
Oh, it's what you said at the beginning, right? Back to the silver bullet response. I think a lot of people believe, and I've even seen people say that, right? Oh, there's an API for that. and they consider it simple. And while common methods of leveraging APIs, like you mentioned, REST, they've made the messaging conduit easier. There's still so many pitfalls. Is it a good API design? Because you can design these things really not so well. And then bridging the gap between technical architecture and solving domain business problems is still a major factor. And that all has to be baked in. So I think that's what people find the most is there's an API for that. It's a silver bullet, bada boom, bada bing, and everything else kind of, gets tossed out.
That's great. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Scott, for all those insights, and hopefully the folks watching this will gain some additional knowledge from it. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, on our LinkedIn page, please feel free to leave a comment. If you're watching this on our blog on prolificbanking.com, please feel free to leave comments, suggestions, other things you'd like us to cover. But we'll be back with another episode 3 of Transformation Conversation. Next up. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much.
Happy Friday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.